I never thought a simple lunch at Tim Hortons would lead me to uncover a 30-year conspiracy that had been hiding in plain sight. But there I was, sitting across from my son, Robert, and his wife, Jennifer, when everything I thought I knew about my family began to unravel. The February wind howled outside the restaurant windows, typical for Calgary this time of year. Robert and Jennifer had insisted on taking me out, saying I'd been cooped up in the house too long since Margaret passed. 6 months. 6 months of waking up to an empty bed, of making coffee for one, of talking to photographs because the silence had become unbearable. "Dad, you need to eat more than toast and tea," Jennifer said, pushing the menu toward me. She was always worrying. That one reminded me of Margaret in that way, always concerned about everyone except herself. I ordered the usual turkey club, black coffee. Robert excused himself to use the restroom, and Jennifer followed moments later to take a phone call. Outside. "Something about work," she said. It was always about work these days. I sat there alone, watching the snow beginning to fall, thinking about how Margaret loved winter. She'd always said the first snowfall felt like the world getting a fresh start. That's when the woman approached my table. She was maybe 50, wearing a long gray coat, her hair tucked under a wool hat. Nothing remarkable about her except for her eyes. They had this intensity, like she was looking right through me, studying me, reading something written on my soul that I couldn't see myself. "Thomas Brennan," she asked quietly. Not a question, really. A confirmation. I nodded, confused. I didn't know this woman. She glanced around quickly, checking the corners of the restaurant, making sure no one was watching. Then she leaned down and placed a small wooden box on the table. It was old, maybe cedar, with a brass clasp that had turned green with age. "Your wife wanted you to have this," she said. Her voice was soft, but there was something controlled about it, something rehearsed. "She made me promise to give it to you exactly 6 months after she passed. I'm sorry for your loss." Before I could ask who she was or what she meant, she turned and walked straight out the door. I watched her go, her gray coat disappearing into the parking lot crowd. By the time I thought to follow, she'd vanished. I stared at the box. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, solid, like it held something substantial. There was a small envelope taped to the top with my name written in Margaret's handwriting. My heart seized. I'd know that handwriting anywhere. The way she looped her G's, the slight slant to the right, the little flourish she always added to the capital T in Thomas. Robert returned first, pulling out his chair. "Everything all right, Dad? You look like you've seen a ghost." I quickly slipped the box into my jacket pocket. "Fine, just tired." Jennifer came back, apologizing for the interruption, and we finished our meal. I barely tasted a bite. The box felt like it was burning a hole through my pocket, pressing against my ribs like a second heartbeat. All I could think about was getting home, being alone, opening it. Whatever this was, it had been important enough for Margaret to orchestrate from beyond death, important enough to wait 6 months. The drive back to the house felt eternal. Robert offered to stay for a while, help me with some repairs he'd been promising to do for months, but I insisted I was fine. I needed to do this by myself. I needed silence and privacy and time to process whatever was about to change. Once they left, I sat in the living room, the box on the coffee table in front of me. The house was so quiet, that thick, heavy quiet that had become my constant companion since Margaret died, the kind of silence that has weight. I stared at the envelope. Part of me didn't want to open it. Margaret was gone, whatever was in. This box, whatever she'd kept from me, it couldn't change that. But the larger part of me, the part that had loved this woman for 42 years, needed to know. Needed to understand why a stranger would approach me in a public restaurant with a secret Margaret had been keeping. I opened the envelope first. Inside was a single piece of paper in Margaret's handwriting. I could picture her writing it, the pen moving across the paper in that careful way she had, always deliberate, always thoughtful. "My dearest Thomas, if you're reading this, I'm gone and I'm so sorry. There are things I never told you, things I couldn't tell you. I need you to understand why. In this box, you'll find a phone. It's important. On March 1st at exactly midnight, someone will call. Answer it. Trust Catherine Morrison. She'll explain everything. I love you more than you'll ever know. The choices I made to protect you and Robert. Please forgive me. M. My hands trembled as I unclasped the box. Inside, nestled in foam padding, was an old flip phone. Not a smartphone, one of those basic models from the early 2000s. It was charged, the screen showing a date and time. Today's date, March 1st, was tomorrow. I sat there for hours just holding the phone, reading Margaret's note over and over. What did she mean? Protect us. Protect us from what? Margaret had been a library assistant. She cataloged books, helped patrons find information, ran the children's reading program. What secrets could a librarian possibly have? That night, I didn't sleep. I kept the phone on my nightstand, watching the minutes tick by. At some point, around 3 in the morning, I got up and pulled out old photo albums. There was Margaret on our wedding day, her smile radiant and genuine. Margaret holding newborn Robert, her eyes soft with new mother wonder. Margaret at the lake cabin we used to rent every summer, laughing at something I'd said. Margaret at Robert's university graduation, proud and beaming. In every photo, she looked happy, normal like every other wife and mother. But now I found myself scrutinizing her face, looking for clues I'd missed. Had there been signs? Had I been blind? The next day dragged. Robert called twice to check on me. I told him I was fine, just sorting through some of Margaret's things. He offered to come help, but I put him off. How could I explain this without sounding crazy? At 11:30 that night, I sat in the darkened living room, the phone on the arm of my chair. I watched the clock. 11:45, 11:55, midnight. The phone rang. My heart hammered as I flipped it open. The screen illuminated my face in the darkness. Hello, Thomas Brennan. A woman's voice, crisp, professional. My name is Catherine Morrison. I'm a friend. Margaret asked me to contact you. I know this must be confusing and frightening, but I need you to listen very carefully. Don't interrupt. Just listen. Can you do that? My mouth had gone dry. Yes? Your wife was not who you thought she was. For the E? Past 15 years, Margaret worked as a civilian consultant for the RCMP. She was part of a long-term investigation into a criminal organization operating out of Alberta and British Columbia. Money laundering, drug trafficking, connections to organized crime. The kind of operation that destroys communities and ruins lives. It started small, something she stumbled onto while working at the library. A man came in regularly, used the computers, always met with the same people in the reading rooms. Margaret noticed patterns, conversations that would drop to whispers when staff approached, financial transfers happening in public. She came to us and reported what she'd seen. We asked her to help. She agreed. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't possible. My Margaret, my wife, involved with the RCMP in some kind of investigation. It didn't fit with anything I knew about her. And yet, as Catherine spoke, small memories began clicking into place. The overtime shifts at the library that had increased about 15 years ago. The way Margaret sometimes seemed distracted at dinner, like her mind was somewhere else. The phone calls she'd take in the kitchen, always stepping away, always closing the door. She was never in danger, Catherine continued. Her role was purely informational. She'd observe, report certain individuals who used the library, pass along details. It was low risk until about 18 months ago. I found my voice. What happened 18 months ago? The organization became aware they had a leak. They didn't know who, but they started systematically eliminating anyone who might have information. Margaret's name came up. We offered her witness protection. She refused. She said she couldn't leave you and Robert without explanation, and if she explained, you'd all have to go into hiding. So she made a choice that surprised even us. She volunteered to continue as bait to draw them out. The room spun. What do you mean, bait? She knew she was dying, Thomas. The cancer. She'd known for 2 years. My eyes snapped open. What? She never told you. She didn't want you to watch her deteriorate. She made a choice. She would use the time she had left to help us catch these people, and she did. 3 weeks before she passed, we arrested 15 members of the organization. It made the news, but they kept her involvement classified. She saved countless lives. I was crying now. silently, tears streaming down my face, my chest heaving with sobs I couldn't quite release. Margaret had known about the cancer. Margaret had hidden it from me. My wife, the woman I'd held while she got weaker, while she wasted away, while I told her everything would be fine. She'd been lying to me the entire time, lying to protect me, lying to catch murderers. "Why are you telling me this now?" I managed to ask. "Because it's not over. One member escaped. His name is Viktor Petrov. We have reason to believe he's figured out Margaret's involvement. He's dangerous, Thomas. We need to get you and your family to safety." "Robert. Oh God, Robert. We're already monitoring your son, but there's something else you need to know." Catherine's voice became strained, and I could hear something in her tone that made my blood run cold even before she spoke. "We believe Petrov has inside help. Someone close to you. That's impossible. Thomas, when was the last time your daughter-in-law, Jennifer, took an unexpected phone call?" My mind flashed back to the restaurant. Jennifer excusing herself, saying something about work. "We've been tracking her communications," Catherine continued, and now her voice was matter-of-fact, cold, clinical. "She's in serious financial trouble. Gambling debts over $200,000. 3 weeks ago, someone approached her, offered to clear her debts if she'd provide information about your routine, your movements, your schedule. She thinks she's feeding information to a private investigator for an insurance case. But, Thomas, the questions they're asking, the level of detail they want, they're building a pattern." "A pattern for what?" "We think they're planning to use you as bait to draw out anyone else who might have worked with Margaret. Your son doesn't know. Jennifer doesn't know the true nature of what she's involved in. But they're using her, and through her, they're planning to use you." My stomach churned. I thought about Jennifer at the restaurant, her sudden need to take a call. Robert had seemed normal, but had he? Or had I just not been paying attention? How many times had Jennifer asked casual questions about my day, my routine? How many times had she mentioned places I frequented or people I saw? "Where is she now?" I asked. "Jennifer? Where is she now?" "She and Robert are at home. We have a team nearby, but I need you to act normal. Tomorrow you're supposed to have dinner with them, correct? Saturday night tradition?" "Yes." "Keep that appointment. Wear this." Catherine gave me our series of numbers and instructions. "A smartwatch is being sent by courier tonight. It has a panic button. If anything feels wrong, press and hold for 3 seconds. We'll be there immediately. Act like nothing has changed. We're going to resolve this, Thomas. We're going to make sure your family stays safe, but we need you to trust us. Can you do that?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to demand answers, to insist on protection, to run. But I understood in that moment what Margaret had understood. Sometimes the only way to survive is to be still, to be patient, to trust the process. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll do whatever you need me to do." The line went dead. I sat in the darkness for a long time. My wife had been a spy. Not a spy exactly, but close enough. She'd risked her life, died knowing she was protecting me, protecting Robert, protecting strangers she'd never meet and I would never know about. All those evenings she'd come home from the library tired, saying she'd been reorganizing the reference section or cataloging new acquisitions or running summer reading programs for children. Some of those had been lies. Beautiful, protective lies. But there was something else now, something sharp and poisonous working its way through my thoughts. If Catherine Morrison was telling me the truth, then Jennifer was a liability. Jennifer was being used to set me up. And that meant Robert was unknowingly married to a woman who was feeding information to murderers. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me, feeling the weight of a 42-year marriage that had been built, in part, on secrets I was only now discovering. The smartwatch arrived at noon the next day, delivered by a courier who didn't give his name and didn't ask for a signature. I put it on immediately, and within minutes, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We're in position. Saturday dinner's a go. Act natural. We're listening." I deleted the message. For the next 24 hours, I tried to live like a normal man preparing for a normal dinner with his son and daughter-in-law. I cleaned the kitchen. I vacuumed. I did laundry. I prepared the pot roast Margaret's mother had taught me to make 50 years ago. The recipe was stained and dog-eared from decades of use. her handwriting noting the correct temperature and the timing for vegetables. But my mind was elsewhere. I kept replaying every interaction with Jennifer over the past weeks, every question she'd asked, every comment she'd made about my schedule or my habits. She was such a good actress. Or maybe she wasn't acting at all. Maybe she genuinely didn't realize what she was involved in. Maybe she really did think she was helping with an insurance investigation. At 5:45 p.m., there was a knock on my door. Robert stood there with Jennifer, both of them smiling. Robert was carrying a bottle of wine, Jennifer holding a salad she'd made. They looked normal, happy, like a young couple excited to spend time with the father-in-law they genuinely cared about. The smartwatch felt heavy on my wrist. "Dad," Robert said, pulling me into a hug. "You look good. Better than last week." "Feeling better," I lied. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." We moved through the evening like actors in a play we'd all somehow agreed to perform. I asked about Robert's work. He was an accountant, meticulously honest, the kind of man who would never knowingly be involved in anything criminal. Jennifer talked about her office, her boss, her friends. She laughed at my jokes. She complimented the pot roast. And through it all, I kept waiting for something, a sign, a signal that would tell me whether Catherine Morrison had been telling me the truth or whether I was losing my mind. It came at 7:15 p.m. during dessert. Jennifer's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and I saw something flicker across her face. Not guilt, exactly. Concern, maybe. Urgency. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said to Robert. "My boss just texted. There's an issue with a file at the office. I know it's Saturday, but..." "Go," Robert said immediately. "We'll be fine." "I'm so sorry, Tom," Jennifer said to me. "I really am. I wanted to spend more time with you tonight." "Don't worry about it," I told her, watching her gather her purse, checking her phone again. "These things happen." After she left, Robert and I sat in the living room with coffee. My son looked tired, stressed even. There were lines around his eyes I didn't remember being there before. "Dad, can I ask you something?" he said. My heart seized. "Of course. Do you think Jennifer's happy? In our marriage, I mean. She seems, I don't know, distracted lately. Like her mind's somewhere else." I chose my words carefully. "Why do you ask?" "I found some things on her computer a few weeks ago. Financial statements for accounts I didn't know existed. Debts listed under her name that she never mentioned. I wanted to confront her, but I didn't want to seem like I didn't trust her. And then when I tried to access the accounts online, they were locked down. I thought maybe she was planning something. A surprise trip, or helping a friend in secret, or something that made sense. But it doesn't. My son was intelligent. He'd seen the signs. He just hadn't put them together yet. "I think," I said slowly, "that sometimes people carry burdens they don't know how to share. That doesn't necessarily mean they don't love you. Sometimes it means they're trying to protect you." Robert looked at me for a long moment. "Is that what you think Margaret was doing? When she was sick, I mean. I know she didn't tell us about the cancer diagnosis for months before it got bad. I always wondered why." There it was, the opening I needed. "I think," I said, "that Margaret was a much braver woman than I gave her credit for, and I think she made decisions that I'm only now beginning to understand." I pressed the panic button on the smartwatch. At 8:47 p.m., exactly 1 minute after Jennifer's car pulled away from the house. Robert didn't even notice. He was staring out the window, lost in thought, probably considering all the ways his marriage might be falling apart. Catherine Morrison showed up at my door 15 minutes later, not in a police cruiser, not in tactical gear, but in jeans and a winter coat carrying a leather folder under her arm. She looked tired, like a woman who'd been carrying other people's secrets for too long. "We need to talk," she said, "all three of us." I made more coffee. "Jennifer didn't go to her office," Catherine explained, once Robert had processed the shock of who she was and why she was in our living room. "She went to a warehouse in northeast Calgary, one of Petrov's properties. She met with 2 individuals we've been trying to track for 6 months. She's working with them?" Robert's voice cracked. "Knowingly?" "No," Catherine said, and there was something almost kind in her tone. "She thinks she's meeting with a friend who's helping her with her gambling debts. The friend is an operator for Petrov. Jennifer has no idea what she's involved in. She's being used. she's also, whether she knows it or not, become a liability. What do you mean, a liability? Robert stood up. What are you saying? I'm saying that Petrov has a pattern. He uses people until they've outlived their usefulness, and then he eliminates them. Jennifer gave him information about your father, but she's also met with him multiple times now. She can identify him. She can place him at certain locations. She's become too dangerous to keep alive. The room went silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. We have a plan, Catherine continued, but it requires your cooperation. And it requires you, she looked at me, to be willing to participate in something that's going to be extremely difficult. What kind of plan? I asked. We let Petrov think his operation is still working. We let him continue to believe that Jennifer is feeding him information about your routine. We set up a scenario where you'll be in a specific place at a specific time, vulnerable and alone. Petrov will see an opportunity, he'll take it, and when he does, we'll have him. You want to use my father as bait, Robert said flatly. Your father has already agreed to help us once, Catherine replied. Margaret did as well. It's not a new choice for him. I looked at my son. He was angry. I could see it in the tightness of his jaw, in the way his hands were clenched into fists. But he was also coming to understand what I'd already accepted. Sometimes the only way to protect people you love is to put yourself in danger. What do you need me to do? I asked Catherine. Continue living your life. Go to the grocery store on Tuesdays and Fridays like you always do. Have your morning coffee at the same café. Take walks in the afternoon. Be predictable. Be vulnerable. When Petrov makes his move, we'll be there. How long will this take? Robert asked. Days, maybe a week. We're increasing surveillance on him now. He's under pressure from his remaining contacts. The organization is unraveling without the structure it had before Margaret helped us dismantle it. Petrov's running out of options. He'll move soon. She was right. Petrov made his move on the 4th day. I was at my usual cafe at 10 a.m., sitting at my usual table by the window, drinking my usual coffee and reading my usual newspaper. The smartwatch buzzed once, the signal that contact had been made. A man entered the cafe. Tall, with dark hair graying at the temples, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. He didn't look at me. He simply ordered a coffee and sat at a table nearby, close enough that we could have had a conversation if either of us had wanted to. He sipped his coffee. He didn't read a newspaper. He just watched me. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted my cup. The smartwatch buzzed 3 times, the signal that backup was in place. The man stood up suddenly and headed for the bathroom. My heart rate spiked. This was it. This was the moment when everything would either work or fall apart. He came back 5 minutes later and sat down at a different table. He left his phone on the table, and for just a moment, while getting up to order more coffee, he turned away. In that moment, I saw the text message on his screen from across the room. Target leaving cafe now. You have 15 minutes before he reaches the bookstore. Confirm. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about ambushing me. This was about Jennifer. They weren't going to kill me in public. They were going to use me as a distraction while Jennifer was eliminated somewhere else. I pressed the panic button twice, the emergency signal. Everything happened very quickly after that. Police units converged on the cafe. Officers came through the front and back doors simultaneously. The man in the charcoal suit, Viktor Petrov, reached for something beneath his jacket, but he was tackled before his hand made it halfway. Catherine Morrison appeared beside my table like she'd materialized from the air itself. We got them, she said. All 3 of them. And Jennifer's team is picking her up now. She'll be confused, but she'll be safe. Your son is being notified. I realized I was shaking. I set down my coffee cup so hard, it sloshed over the rim. It's over, Catherine said. It's finally over. But it wasn't. 3 days later, after Petrov had been officially charged, after Jennifer had been given immunity in exchange for her testimony, after my family had begun the long process of understanding what had happened, Catherine called me again. I need to see you, she said, alone. There's something else, something Margaret was protecting you from. We met at a park on the northwest side of the city, away from casual observation. Catherine looked even more tired than she had before, like The apprehension of the past few days had worn away some final layer of professional composure. "What I told you was true," she said without preamble. "Margaret did work for us. She did help bring down most of Petrov's organization. But what I didn't tell you was why she was so willing to do it." "I don't understand." Catherine handed me a folder. Inside were photographs. Some were of Margaret, taken at various times over the past 20 years. But others were of a young woman. A girl, really, maybe 14 or 15 in some of the photos, older in others. Dark hair, similar features to Margaret's, and alongside those photographs were documents, birth certificates, hospital records, social security information. "Margaret had a daughter," Catherine said quietly, "before she met you, when she was in her early 20s. The father was a man named Dmitry Volkov. He was connected to organized crime even back then. Margaret didn't know how deep his connections ran. When she realized she was pregnant, she tried to leave. Volkov didn't let her go easily." My mind was spinning. "Where is this daughter?" "She was placed into protective custody by Margaret's family, raised by Margaret's sister under a different name. Margaret saw her, but only rarely, and never publicly. When Volkov found out Margaret was talking to authorities, he made threats. Against the daughter, against anyone Margaret cared about. Margaret agreed to work with the RCMP on the condition that they protect her daughter. And they did. Her daughter is alive. She's safe. She's been safe for the past 20 years because Margaret made herself useful." I couldn't speak. "But there's more," Catherine continued, and now her voice had shifted. It was harder, sharper, edged with something that might have been regret or might have been anger. 2 years ago, when Margaret's cancer was diagnosed, she learned something. Volkov had recently been released from prison. Officially, he was given early parole for good behavior. Unofficially, we believe he made a deal with someone inside our organization, someone who wanted Margaret's daughter found and eliminated, someone who wanted the entire operation Margaret had helped build dismantled. Why would anyone want that? Because Margaret's investigation led to the exposure of very powerful people, politicians, businessmen, even law enforcement. We got the foot soldiers, but the people who funded them, the people who made the decisions, some of them were never charged. Some of them were never even identified. We got the organization structure, but we didn't get the architects." I felt cold. "And you're telling me this because Margaret found out. Because in her final months, while you thought she was just getting weaker from cancer, she was actually looking into the names I wouldn't give her. The corruption she suspected ran deeper than Petrov. And on the night she died, Thomas, she wasn't alone." Catherine pulled out another photograph. It showed Margaret in a hospital bed, but this time there was someone sitting beside her. A man in his 60s with distinctive white hair and a face I recognized, District Commander David Reeves. "He visited her that night," Catherine said. "We have security footage. We have the logs that show him accessing her room. Margaret died 30 minutes after he left. The autopsy confirmed it was cancer, but there was something else in her system, something that accelerated the process, made it so she couldn't linger, couldn't ask more questions, couldn't interfere with his plans. I couldn't breathe." "You're saying he murdered her?" "I'm saying Margaret was killed to silence her, and the people behind it wanted to make sure her daughter would be next. Petrov was supposed to eliminate the daughter after he killed you and Jennifer. Reeves would have his loose ends tied up, you would all be dead, and he would have won." "Why didn't you stop it?" I heard the rage in my own voice. "If you knew this, why didn't you stop it?" "Because I couldn't prove it," Catherine said, and for the first time I heard something crack in her professional composure. "I suspected. I still suspect. But I don't have evidence that would hold up in court, and Reeves is powerful enough to destroy anyone who tried to move against him without absolute proof." Margaret knew that. That's why she worked with me without telling you. That's why she hid what she was doing. She thought if she played the game carefully enough, she could protect you and Robert and her daughter without putting any of you directly in the line of fire. But it didn't work. "No," Catherine agreed. "It didn't work." For 3 weeks after Catherine told me the truth, I did nothing. I didn't call the police. I didn't go to the media. I didn't try to get justice for Margaret. Instead, I did what Margaret would have done. I watched, I waited, I researched, and I found something that Catherine had missed. Margaret, had kept a second diary. Not the one I'd found in her desk after she died. That was the obvious one, meant for me to find. The second one was hidden in the lining of an old cookbook in the kitchen, the same cookbook her mother had given us as a wedding gift. Inside, in Margaret's careful handwriting, were dates and times and names, conversations she'd overheard, phone calls she'd reported to Catherine, and most importantly, a series of entries that documented Reeves's involvement in the cover-up. Margaret had suspected him. She'd documented him. And in the final entry, dated 2 days before she died, she'd written instructions for what to do with the information if anything happened to her. Dear Thomas, if you're reading this, then I'm dead and Reeves has won. Or at least, he thinks he has. I'm leaving you instructions on what to do. Not for revenge. Revenge is a luxury people like us can't afford. But for justice. And for everyone else he might hurt. The recordings are hidden in 3 locations. The documentation is backed up in 4. I've given a sealed envelope to Catherine Morrison that should only be opened if I die under suspicious circumstances. I trust her, but I don't trust her organization, so I'm giving you the insurance policy. The truth. Don't expose him immediately. Wait. Let him think he's won. Let him believe the threat is over. Let him become careless. And when he's at his most confident, when he's already moved on to his next target, you'll have everything you need to bring him down. Not just him. Everyone he's protected, everyone he's covered for, the entire structure of corruption he's built. I love you. Forgive me. And trust yourself. M. I found the first recording 2 hours later. It was hidden in a sealed plastic bag in the utility closet, buried beneath old paint cans and cleaning supplies. The audio was dated from 3 years ago. It was Reeves's voice, speaking with someone I didn't recognize, discussing the Margaret problem and how important it was to make sure she understands the limits of her cooperation. The second recording was in the spare bedroom, inside a hollowed-out book on the shelf. This one was more recent, Reeves discussing with an unknown woman how much longer Margaret would be useful, and whether it was time to make the necessary arrangements. The third recording was in the garage, hidden in a toolbox under the workbench. This one was the most damning. It was Reeves speaking directly to Margaret, or to someone who was recording Margaret's half of a phone conversation. He was explaining very clearly that her daughter's safety depended on her silence, that if Margaret cooperated, everyone would be safe, that if she didn't, everyone would suffer. I took everything to a lawyer, not a local lawyer, one in Vancouver who specialized in police corruption cases. Her name was Diane Foster, and she'd spent 15 years fighting law enforcement agencies from the outside. This is incredibly dangerous material, she told me after reviewing everything. If Reeves knows you have it, you're in serious danger. He doesn't know, I said, and I want to move carefully. Margaret left instructions. She wanted me to wait, to let him think he was safe. Why? Diane asked. Because Margaret was smarter than all of us. She knew that if we moved too quickly, Reeves would disappear. His contacts would disappear. The evidence would be buried. She wanted us to collect everything, to document every connection, to make sure that when we brought him down, everyone he'd been protecting would go down with him. For 4 months, Diane and I built the case. We tracked financial records. We interviewed witnesses, carefully, quietly, without drawing attention. We gathered documentation of Reeves's abuse of power, his interference in investigations, his involvement in cover-ups. We traced the money he'd been paid by the criminals he'd protected. And all the while, Reeves went about his life. He was promoted to deputy commissioner. He gave speeches about the importance of ethics in law enforcement. He was quoted in the newspaper talking about the dangers of organized crime. He was, as Margaret had predicted, completely confident that he'd won. On the day before the RCMP was supposed to announce Reeves's promotion to the position of commissioner of the entire provincial force, Diane filed a 48-count indictment against him. The charges were obstruction of justice, perverting the course of justice, conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to obstruct justice, accepting bribes, misuse of his position, abuse of authority, and, in Margaret's case specifically, accessory to murder. The story broke at 6 a.m. By noon, Reeves had been arrested at his home. By 6 p.m., every news station in Canada was running the story. By 9 p.m., the RCMP had launched an internal investigation into his entire department. But I didn't watch the news. I went to the cemetery instead. Margaret's grave was simple, just her name and the years of her life. Nothing about how she'd spent her final years, nothing about the people she'd saved or the corruption she'd exposed, just a name and a life measured in numbers. I placed flowers on her grave, white roses, her favorite, and I stood there for a long time, not saying anything, just being present. "It's done," I finally said out loud. "He's going to prison. Everyone he protected is going to be exposed. Your daughter is safe. Robert is safe. Everyone is continue 3:32 p.m. safe now." The wind moved through the trees, and I pretended it was Margaret answering me. But I was wrong. Everything wasn't done. Because 3 weeks into Reeves's trial, something happened that nobody anticipated. Catherine Morrison appeared at my door on a Tuesday morning. She looked different, not just tired, but haunted, like something had broken inside her and she'd been reassembled but not quite put back together correctly. "He's dead," she said without preamble. I felt my chest constrict. "What?" "Reeves. He died in custody last night. Apparent suicide. He hung himself in his cell using bedsheets." I sat down. I didn't know what else to do. "That's not the reason I'm here," Catherine continued, and now I heard something new in her voice. Guilt. Shame. "I came to tell you because I think you deserve to know. And because I can't carry this alone anymore." "Know what?" "Reeves didn't kill Margaret," Catherine said, and the world went quiet in a way that made my ears ring. I stared at her. I couldn't form words. "I did," she said. "I killed Margaret, with Reeves's knowledge, with his permission, at his direction, and I've been carrying that guilt for 2 years." The room spun. Catherine sat down across from me, and for the first time, I saw the full weight of what she'd been carrying, the late nights, the endless investigations, the obsession with catching Petrov. All of it had been her way of trying to balance the scales, trying to create some kind of mathematical equation where the good she did would equal the evil she'd committed. "Margaret found out I was compromised," Catherine explained. "She discovered that I'd been taking money from people Reeves was protecting. Not a lot of money, but enough. Enough to make me complicit, enough to make me a liability just like she was. Reeves told me Margaret had to be eliminated. He said it was for the greater good. He said if Margaret exposed me, the entire investigation would collapse. Justice would never be served." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, and I heard the hollowness in my own voice. "Because Margaret left another envelope, not for you, for me. I only opened it after Reeves was arrested. It contained her full documentation of my corruption, her evidence of my involvement with Reeves, her proof that I was dirty, and there was a letter." Catherine pulled out a sealed envelope from her bag. She handed it to me. I opened it with shaking hands. "Dear Catherine, if you're reading this, you've made the decision to try to protect Reeves. You've chosen your career over my life. You've chosen to compromise your integrity for his promises of safety and security. I want you to know that I understand why you did it. I want you to know that I forgive you. Not because what you did is forgivable, but because I made my choice, and I understand the weight of yours. But here's what you need to know. Thomas will figure it out eventually. He's going to investigate. He's going to find inconsistencies in the official story. He's going to discover the truth about Reeves's involvement. And when he does, you have 2 choices. You can let him expose you along with Reeves. You can face the consequences of your actions and rot in prison with a clear conscience. Or you can tell him the truth yourself. You can confess, you can cooperate with his lawyer, you can become a witness against Reeves and help Thomas expose not just his corruption but your own. I suspect you'll choose the second option. I suspect you'll try to bargain your way into a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony. And I suspect that choice will, in a strange way, be more punishment than prison ever could be. Because you'll have to live with the knowledge that you traded my life for your freedom. And you'll have to watch my family grieve a loss that you caused. You'll have to understand every single day that your choice to take my life was less about protecting justice and more about protecting yourself. I don't hate you, Catherine. Hatred requires more energy than I have, But I want you to understand what you've done. I want you to understand who you really are. And I want my husband to understand it too. Because if Thomas ever finds out the truth, and I believe he will, I want him to know that I knew. I knew you were going to kill me. I knew Reeves was orchestrating it. And I let you do it anyway. Because the alternative was watching you both go free. Watching Reeves protect more criminals. Watching the corruption continue unchecked. And I couldn't bear that. So I made a choice. I gave you the opportunity to kill me so that my husband would have the evidence he needed to bring you both down. I'm not a martyr. I'm not noble. I'm just a woman who understood that sometimes the only way to stop corruption is to be willing to die. So I died. And I did it on my terms. Margaret, I read the letter 3 times. Each time I cried harder. She knew? I asked Catherine. Margaret knew you were going to kill her? She must have suspected, Catherine said quietly. She left that letter knowing that one of us would read it eventually. Either me when I made the decision to do Reeves's bidding, or you when you discovered the truth. She was always one step ahead. Why would she choose that? Why would she let you kill her? Because if I had refused, Reeves would have found someone else, someone more ruthless, someone who wouldn't have taken pictures of the evidence beforehand or left those recordings for Margaret to find. Margaret orchestrated this entire thing, Thomas, from the very beginning. She orchestrated her own death in a way that would guarantee that not only Reeves would go to prison, but the entire structure of corruption he'd been protecting would come crashing down with him. I had Catherine arrested the next day, but before I did, I made sure she understood something. Margaret had left one more thing, a final gift, hidden in a place only I would know to look. It was in the attic, in the box where Margaret kept old Christmas decorations. Inside was another envelope, this one containing Margaret's final request. Dear Thomas, in case you've reached this far, you've discovered Catherine's role in my death. You're probably angry. You're probably grieving in a way you thought you'd already processed. You're probably wondering how I could forgive the woman who killed me. Here's the truth. I forgave her a long time ago, not for what she did, but for what drove her to do it. Catherine was a good woman who made bad choices. She was trapped between her career and her conscience, and she chose wrong. But I have to believe, that given the right circumstances, people can change. People can choose differently. So I'm leaving you a choice as well, Thomas. Catherine will be arrested. She'll face trial. She might spend years in prison, or she might spend that time in a witness protection program, testifying against everyone Reeves protected, exposing the entire structure of corruption. I'm asking you, not demanding, but asking, to consider advocating for the second option, not for Catherine's sake, for mine, and for the sake of everyone she might help expose if she's alive and willing to cooperate. Don't forgive her. Don't forget what she did. Just understand that sometimes the most powerful act of justice is allowing someone to spend the rest of their life making amends for their crimes. Prison ends your ability to do good. Prosecution ends it. But cooperation, sacrifice, a commitment to exposing the people you've protected, that's a sentence that never really ends. I hope you'll choose this path, but I'll understand if you don't. All my love, M. I gave Catherine Morrison a choice. She could face the death penalty for murder, or she could enter into a witness protection program and spend the rest of her life testifying against everyone she'd ever protected, everyone Reeves had ever paid off, everyone in law enforcement who'd been compromised. She chose the second option. Her testimony brought down 43 police officers, 12 government officials, 8 judges, and 5 major organized crime figures. Her cooperation exposed a corruption network that ran through every level of Canadian law enforcement. And through it all, I carried the weight of knowing that Margaret had planned this, that she'd orchestrated her own death to expose corruption that would never have been brought to light any other way, that she'd sacrificed herself not for me, not for Robert, but for strangers she would never meet. On the day Catherine entered her new identity in the witness protection program, she asked to see me one final time. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I can't give you that, I replied, but I can tell you that Margaret didn't hate you, and there was nothing I could do that would be punishment enough for what you did. So I'm going to let you carry the weight of it. Every single day for the rest of your life, you're going to know that you killed a woman who trusted you, a woman who forgave you before you even admitted what you'd done." Catherine didn't cry. She just nodded and walked away. 5 years later, Robert and Jennifer divorced. Jennifer never fully recovered from what happened. She knew logically that she wasn't responsible for being manipulated, but she couldn't forgive herself for providing information to people who would have killed her. Husband's father, without hesitation. She moved to Vancouver and started a new life. I heard through mutual friends that she'd become a counselor for victims of financial crime. Robert struggled for a long time, but eventually he rebuilt his life. He met someone new, a woman named Emma who was a librarian, which I thought Margaret might have found humorous. They married in a small ceremony, and I walked Robert down the aisle, tears streaming down my face the entire time. I never remarried. I didn't date or try to find companionship or attempt to fill the Margaret-shaped hole that her death left in my life. Instead, I spent my time working with Catherine's remaining connections in law enforcement to expose other corruption networks. I became, by accident more than design, an advocate for victims of police misconduct, and I spent a lot of time at Margaret's grave, talking to her about the life that continued without her. 3 years after Catherine entered witness protection, I received a letter with no return address. It was written in a handwriting I didn't recognize, on plain white paper, in terms that were deliberately vague to protect whoever sent it. "Thomas, I want you to know that I'm alive, that I'm well, that every day I make the choice to continue cooperating, to continue exposing corruption, to continue trying to balance the scales of justice. I want you to know that I think about Margaret every single day, that I understand, more fully now than I ever did before, what she sacrificed and why, that I've spent the past 5 years reading everything I could find about her life and trying to become worthy of the sacrifice she made. I can't ask for your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to be the person Margaret believed I could become if given the chance. I'm trying to make sure that the corruption I was part of is never allowed to flourish again. And I wanted to tell you that Margaret was right about all of it. Her plan, her sacrifice, the way she orchestrated everything from beyond her own death, it all worked. She exposed corruption that would have destroyed hundreds of lives. She changed the entire culture of law enforcement in this country. She did it by dying, by trusting me to eventually understand her choice, and by believing in her husband's ability to seek justice. I'm not asking you to write back. I'm not asking for any kind of relationship or redemption. I just wanted you to know. C. I burned the letter after reading it, not out of anger, but out of respect for the person Margaret had tried to save, the person Catherine was becoming in her enforced isolation. Years later, when people would ask me about the wooden box and the phone call and the entire unraveling of what I thought was my normal life, I would tell them this: the greatest conspiracy in my life was not organized crime or police corruption or the criminal networks that Margaret helped expose. The greatest conspiracy was my wife's choice to sacrifice herself so that justice could be served. Margaret taught me something that took me years to understand, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let people make their own choices, even when those choices will lead to your death. She could have refused Catherine's demands. She could have run into witness protection. She could have exposed Reeves immediately and let the consequences fall where they fell. Instead, she orchestrated a plan so intricate, so perfectly constructed, that even now I sometimes find myself wondering how much of what happened was fate and how much was Margaret's invisible hand guiding us all toward justice. The wooden box sits on my nightstand, empty now, but still heavy with memory. The phone is long dead, but I've kept it. A reminder that sometimes the most important messages come from people who've already left us. And if Margaret taught me anything, it's this: that revenge isn't sweet, justice isn't satisfying, but the knowledge that you fought for something larger than yourself, that you were willing to sacrifice everything so that the people you love might live in a better world. That's something worth dying for. Margaret Brennan died in February. By June, corruption had been exposed and evil had been held accountable. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't a neat resolution where everyone got what they deserved. Life is messier than that. But somewhere in the space between death and justice, between sacrifice and accountability, Margaret found a way to change the world. And that, in the end, was her greatest revenge. Not the exposure of corruption, not the imprisonment of murderers, not the upheaval of law enforcement agencies, but the knowledge that she had mattered, that her life, in all its complexity and contradiction, had mattered, that her choices, made from love and desperation and hope, had echoed beyond her death and created waves of change that would affect people she would never meet. That's the real treasure in the wooden box. That's the message in the phone call from beyond the grave. That's the legacy of a woman who loved so fiercely that she was willing to die so that others might live better.